guys, this is Tom from Horizon Hobby and Spektrum RC. Here today we're going to talk about the new update for the Powersafe receiver that utilizes the AS3000, which we got mounted right here. So to do that, you need to update your receiver, your radio, which we have a DX18 here today, but this is for any Gen 2 or the IX12. That's minus the E radios. Alright, if you need to learn how to update your radio, look up here, we've got a video posted, or check in the description below. And we're just going to go ahead and talk about how to set up an AS3000. We've got Miguel here with us. He is one of the engineers for the AS3000, so he would be greatly equipped to tell us.
Andy and I worked tirelessly on this.
Andy and Miguel.
Probably like the past year and a half.
Yeah.
And we're very happy to finally get it out. We kind of had like an idea for how we wanted this set up, but the first phase of it was like a really advanced setup. You had to set up all the channels individually, and we just kind of rethought everything, you know, restructured it, and we made it a super simple setup. I mean, the transmitter and the receiver interact, share like setting parameters and stuff like that, and it just does almost everything for you.
So let's go through step one. When you get your AS3000 and your Powersafe receiver, what do you have to do? Well, like I said, you have to update it, which is really simple. We have another video for that. Check it out in the description below. But next, what do we do, Miguel?
Well, first, so I guess the first thing you want to do is make sure your plane is set up already the way you normally would without a gyro.
Okay.
Make sure you've flown it, done trims and everything, you know.
All right.
Because basically what's going to happen when you do this setup is the transmitter is going to feed a bunch of settings from the model. So like sub-trims, reversing, some of the wing type parameters. It's going to feed that to the receiver, and all you're going to tell the receiver is, this is my gain channel over here, my knob. And you're going to tell it a generic kind of plane type, like a sport or 3D plane or something, and it'll take all those transmitter settings and set everything up for you.
Right.
So you don't have to do almost anything.
Yeah.
But you do need to make sure that the plane is already set up properly to fly, you know, have all those sub-trims and everything.
So at least one or two good pre-flights before putting your AS3000 in there. That's for, you know, making sure all your directions are going the right direction, you know, your servos, control surfaces, and to make sure that everything's trimmed properly. That's important.
Right. And then after that, you want to add a gain control channel. So in this case, we're using the knob on the top right, and you're going to have to select that when you go through the initial setup to tell the receiver which channels control gain. So we can walk through this setup here on the transmitter. So if you press your scroll wheel and you scroll down all the way down here next to VTX setup and custom voice setup, there's a forward programming menu. We should probably point out, if your receiver's not connected and the transmitter's not getting telemetry, that menu is not going to be there.
There it is.
The menu doesn't necessarily indicate that the receiver supports forward programming. It doesn't actually know that until it tries to connect. So you might be connected to a telemetry receiver and it'll show forward programming, but it doesn't mean it supports it. You need to make sure the receiver's updated and that that update supports forward programming.
Right.
So we'll go into that menu, and the first thing you're going to see here is an integrated stabilization menu, receiver settings, and a factory reset. And then at the bottom, we have a status screen that'll give some AS3000 specific statuses. So in this case, it's telling us we need to do an initial setup for the gyro. Later on, we'll show you guys some other messages that it'll show you. But so we'll just walk through this integrated stabilization, and then first time setup is right here. So when you enter this first time setup, there's going to be some warning messages telling you that you need to make sure your model's been flown, that you've configured everything, everything's good to go.
Essentially what we just said, but it kind of reminds you there.
It's a friendly reminder.
Yes.
It'll let you know that if you've made wing type changes, sub-trim changes, or servo reversing, it'll tell you you need to go through initial setup again. Or in this case, if you don't do a wing type change, but just like a reversing or sub-trim change, there's another menu item we'll show you guys in a bit that's just to relearn those settings, so you don't have to reset all your gains and everything like that. You'll keep all those settings.
So like if you happen to replace your rudder servo and it's reversed from the one that was already in there and you had to reverse it, we have a
or it doesn't have that same travel range, you need to just travel or some sub-trim, center positions. You will have to go and teach the receiver these new settings so that it knows how to operate the gyro properly for that channel. So then the first actual setting in the initial setup is your orientation. So here we have a plane image, which is kind of like a point of reference, and we have the gyro image on the right.
Okay.
And so what this image is going to show you is the direction of the Spektrum bar logo and the compliance logo. So if I go to so this would be a normal upright pointing forward on the plane. So the way we have it set up right now, right?
Yep, upright pointing forward, if you guys can see that.
And so if we go to the second item, you have the logos on the left side, and the Spektrum logo on the left, and the compliance markings on the right.
About like that, potentially?
It would actually be the other way.
The other way?
The logos to the Spektrum logo
so
to
the
the
logo's
left.
towards the left wing.
Just like that.
Yep. So, it's fairly self-explanatory.
This one is pointing down, so you can't see the compliance logo since we have that little mount on it.
Yeah.
But basically, the compliance logo is pointing up, and that little front screw is pointing to the front. And then you have basically 8 different orientations. So you can do sideways, forward, upside down,
backwards,
whatever you want.
Yep.
But we're going to go with the default.
Just like that.
Pointing forward and facing up, or upright. And then second menu is to select your gain channel. So this is a channel you're going to use to adjust your gyro gains. You can either select it manually, and it will leave out some channels that are already assigned to your control surfaces.
Right, yeah.
It knows how to keep out some of them so you don't accidentally select them.
Yeah, you don't want to accidentally select
so you could manually select it, or while this item is open for editing, you can adjust your channel that you actually want to use, and it'll automatically set it.
Yeah, so initially we like to say that we want to use the knob for the gyro gain.
Right.
And then once you have a comfortable position on the knob that you find, okay, 55% on the knob is where my gain's the best, then you can set that to a switch, which is pretty cool.
Right. You could set that to a switch and do your digital switch setup to have specific output values for that switch based on what you found using the knob.
Yeah. Just rolling the knob is probably the simplest and most...
in the case that you didn't assign a channel to that knob before doing this setup, then you will have to manually select it, because the transmitter won't know that you're moving the knob if it's not assigned to the channel. So
make sure you've assigned a knob beforehand. If you haven't,
it makes it easier.
Have to do it afterward.
And then the Airframe type, there's only 2 default types. There's 3D and Sport Scale. And basically what this does is it sets a default set of base gain values, which the knob or your gain channel then scales.
Okay.
But you can go and manually adjust these roll, pitch, and yaw values later. But these, for most people, will probably be good enough.
Yeah.
And you can go and adjust those ratios. And then the final thing is the frame rate. And this is a servo frame rate. It has nothing to do with your bound frame rate. And that's because the gyro updates at about 5.5 milliseconds.
Okay.
So it's updating faster than what you're actually sending data to it.
Right.
So if your servos are super fancy and they can support all the way down to 5.5 milliseconds, then you can select that setting and your gyro will be updating the servos at its full speed.
You'll get the best performance out of your servos in your airplane that way.
But you do really need to make sure that it supports them. If you're not sure, 22 milliseconds still works fine. It's the safest thing to choose. That's why it's the default value. Hit apply. Your receiver is going to reboot to apply some of these settings properly. And it'll tell you here, receiver's rebooting. So back out of that. And then you can enter forward programming menu. You can see its status says it's ready.
Oh, okay.
So what we didn't notice here, because everything was set up properly, was there are 2 checks that the receiver does once you've done that initial setup. The first one is that the gyro or the sensor is upright. So if you have it upside down, it's not going to initialize. You're not even going to get telemetry. We can actually show that right now. We could turn this off.
So here's a good troubleshooting step.
Yeah.
So whatever you set the orientation to, when it initializes, the check is set. So you want to make sure that you don't have it that way. Let's say we have our plane upside down.
And one thing to note is it can only check the attitude. It can't check, if you have the sensor set up to be upright, it doesn't know if you're pointing it backwards or not. It can't check that for you. But it can check if it's sideways or upside down when it shouldn't be. So in this case, you have it upside down. If we turn this on, it's not gonna initialize. So we can move this. Like
nothing.
you'll see, you don't hear the little confirmation beeps from the servos. If you turn it upright,
put it back. So we just flipped our plane back over.
So now it's checking for gyro stability, checking for center positions, and then it initializes.
And she's ready to go.
So there's the other step. After it checks for the gyro being upright, it checks for your channels based on the wing type settings it got from the transmitter. It needs to make sure that those channels are centered, because it will still recapture those center positions on every boot up to compensate for in-air trim adjustments, not sub-trims. And we'll actually talk about that in a second.
Okay.
So we have it upright. We can try power cycling again, and you'll see that it will not initialize, but since it did get past the gyro setup, you will get telemetry. So you can open the forward programming menu, and you can see in this status screen, or in the status message, it says center 6. That means that one of your channels that is assigned to the gyro is not centered, based on the sub-trim settings and everything else that it got.
Right. So that's troubleshoot step number 2.
Right. So if you let go of the stick and it's actually centered, then it initializes.
Right.
And then we can talk about some other troubleshoot stuff at the end.
At the end.
But we'll go through the rest of the
troubleshooting help. You know, you've already all done this. Just skip to the end.
Right.
We'll have a link below so you guys can watch that.
Right. So we already set up the gyro. It's that simple. It's all good to go. So
is that simple?
Yep.
It's done?
Yep.
What?
So if we go to our monitor here, we look at our gain channel, which is X plus 1.
Okay.
We're going to set it to 0 there.
All right.
So if you move the gyro there, Tom, it's not going to do anything.
We got nothing.
And so when you do assign this to a switch later on, you'll probably want a 0 gain position as a off switch for your gyro. Right. Just in case. Just in case something goes wrong.
It's always good to have a 0 gain just in case it just starts to go nuts in the air.
Yeah. You go faster than what you had previously configured it for. You didn't account for all the factors, It's just a kill switch.
Yep.
So we'll increase this gyro gain up. And you can see if you start moving it,
look at that.
All of them move.
That's really sensitive.
Yeah. We'll probably move this down quite a bit. So only a 6 gain there.
But if you guys can see that, I'm moving the gyro, and it is a right gyro right now. So as I move it and I stop, the servos will go back to center. And
it does move kind of quick, but you can probably tell that everything is moving in the right direction that it's meant to be. You don't have to go and tell it, my aileron channel, or my aileron servo to left is, you don't have to go and configure all that separately. It automatically
learned that
from the transmitter settings, right?
Right.
And that's part of what we work so much on, making sure to get it right. So it takes out a lot of potential user error.
Right.
Yeah, it just takes all that gyro setup that you normally would have to do.
A lot of guesswork is taken out.
Right, a lot of the guesswork is gone.
Yeah.
So one thing to note right now is if I go to below 0, nothing happens.
All right.
But we're going to go here and show you guys some other gyro settings you can add later on, some more advanced settings.
Not a default setting, but like you said, an advanced setting.
If you enable heading hold, this below 0 value will basically be a heading hold value.
Okay.
So actually, let's go and show that setup right now. So we'll go back to forward programming, integrated stabilization, and we're going to go to the gyro settings. So the first thing you'll see is that Airframe Type that you selected on the initial setup, and this has those default values that we talked about. You can change this to 3D, and it'll readjust those values.
Okay.
Or you can go and adjust these values manually, and it'll set it to custom.
Right.
But if you don't like them, you can always go back to those default settings.
Sure.
So we'll just keep the default sport gain value for now. And these range from 0 to 100%.
Okay.
And with a decimal for extra resolution.
And the knob is a proportion of that.
Right. So if my knob is at 50% value on the channel output, then you're actually getting 20 roll, 25 pitch, and 30 yaw gain. The next thing here that you can adjust is stick priority. So this determines how much you can move the stick, or how much you need to move the stick before the gyro stops reacting. So if you see there, I applied some roll.
Yeah,
and
the
now
stopped moving with it.
If I increase this priority value more, so this ranges from 0 to 200, by the way. If I increase this more, then it'll take a lot less stick or deflection from center position for the gyro to stop affecting you.
Right.
So if you only want the gyro to work when you're not touching the stick at all, then you probably want really high priority.
Yeah, right.
If you want the gyro to be kicking in even when you have a lot of stick deflection, then you want lower priority. And that's something you'll have to mess around with. But these default values are really good. Most people will not need to change them. I never change them.
That's normally what I stick with is 160 around on pretty much any plane.
Right. And then the last menu here for gyro settings is the heading hold. So as you guys noticed, when we have negative gyro position or negative output on the gyro gain channel, there's nothing. If I enable one of these, so I'm going to enable heading hold on roll.
Okay.
Now that negative value applies heading hold. And what it also does, so that's probably really high. So keep in mind, when we're moving this gyro manually, we are moving it a lot more than you normally would in the plane, so it's reacting a lot. So in this case, we have to use really
low to see
low gains just to not, have them kicking around.
So if you guys can tell, this is heading hold. Heading hold is what it's going to try to hold the last heading that it was in after you were giving it stick.
It doesn't just react from quick jerks from the wind or turbulence and stuff like that. It'll actually try to always hold that position.
So I'm putting it in that position right there, and it's holding the roll to counteract that. So if you like doing knife edges or something like that, and you don't want to have to be constantly adjusting your roll and your pitch and all that, you can do roll pitch heading hold on. What I was going to say earlier is if I do enable roll, you will notice that when my gain is negative, the other channels that don't have heading hold on now have gyro gain for that negative value. So you still get rate gains.
Basically, enables heading hold for the channel you selected, and you get the rate gains for that negative value as well. I would probably recommend for most people just doing heading hold on roll and pitch, especially if you bank and yank a lot, because if you enable it for yaw as well, you're never going to reset that heading if you're not using it to turn a lot.
It can make it feel
it can make it feel really weird. So I'd probably recommend for most people just starting off with roll and pitch, and then maybe try yaw, and of course always have that zero position switch for your gains, so you can take it off if
always have that
weird stuff starts happening that you don't expect. But yeah, roll and pitch is probably what most people will want to use.
I like using yaw heading hold as a takeoff mode.
And so we actually have, if you have a separate nose wheel, we have a setting, which we'll talk about in a bit, to actually set up the nose wheel separately from all these other gains. So the next thing we'll go to is our system setup. So these are some, so here you'll see that relearn servo settings we mentioned earlier. So this is only if you do like servo adjustment, like reversing, travel adjustments, even dual rates adjustments. It uses those settings as well. And subtrims. Then you do have to do a relearn servo settings. If you do in-flight trim adjustments, so just using the little switches by the gimbals, you don't have to do this. All you have to do is a power cycle. So basically, the way trim or center positions work on this is when the receiver does the initial setup, you get your sub-trim settings from the transmitter, but you don't get the in-flight trim settings, because that's something you'll probably be adjusting a lot more, and you don't want to have to go and do a relearn servo settings every time. So what you have for your center position capture, which the receiver does at startup, is there's a plus or minus 30% window that it allows the channel to be in. And that window is offset by your sub-trim. And that sub-trim will shift that 30% window. So you should still be fine not doing this relearn setting if you're just adjusting in-flight trims. The next thing you can adjust is the orientation. So like say you want to change the gyro, put it in a different, or you added some new stuff to the plane and you need to put it somewhere else. Then you can adjust the orientation here.
So that same orientation screen.
So it's the same one from the initial setup. One thing to note here is once I go into this menu, it won't let me leave it. I have to go forward and do a save settings and reboot. And that's to avoid, so basically when you change the orientation, you have to reboot the plane for it to initialize with that new orientation. So it forces you to do that save settings and reboot, because otherwise you might back out and try flying, and you have
Orientation's
the
wrong.
right.
Yeah.
Your orientation's wrong. You crash. You don't want that.
It makes sure that you know what you're doing.
Right. And the third thing is the gain channel select. So this will have the channel, which is the knob that you adjusted on all three axes.
This is important. This is where you can, let's say you want to have gain channels adjustments on separate channels. So for your roll, pitch, and yaw, you can set it to the knob or slider. All three can be different. Two can be the same. One's different. You know, however you want it. So instead of like the initial setup where it just had you use the one, you can pick three in this menu. Okay.
And then the last thing here is that nose wheel setup we talked about.
Nose wheel setup.
Right. So
this is one question we get a lot.
So the first thing is, do you want it enabled? Yes. So that's what the axis is for. So you turn that on. The nose wheel channel is the actual channel that is steering the nose wheel.
Okay.
So this,
whatever your nose wheel servo's
so
on.
you can move your stick. Yeah, it should be like a mix or something you have set up, and it won't capture the rudder output because that's assigned to. It knows to pick any other channel it moves.
Okay.
So in this case, we have our nose wheel set to X+3.
Okay.
Then the recheck channel. This is to tell the receiver whether your nose wheel is currently retracted or not, if that's something you have.
Yeah.
So that we have set to X+2. So I just move the switch there. Then we have the retract position. So this basically is telling it, if I flip my retract switch that I just assigned, it tells me what it currently thinks it's in, its current state.
You may need to change it.
Right. So basically, I have this set to, I have my switch set to what is retracted, but the receiver thinks it's extended. So if I just select there on that extended item, it reverses it in a way. Right. So now I didn't change my switch, but now it thinks it's retracted. And then I can flip it, the switch again, and it's basically just the opposite of what it was before. So it's like a reverse for your retract channel.
Cool, cool.
The extended delay is a delay in seconds for the gyro to kick in on that channel.
Right.
So if you extend your gear, but it takes a while for it to come out, you don't want the wheel to start moving right away.
Right.
You want a slight delay, you know, so that it's clear from the plane.
Absolutely.
So set that 2 or 3 seconds. The reverse, so this is basically when the nose wheel is moving, you want to tell it the proper direction to move in.
So with this one, this is the gyro reverse. So if you nose to the right, you want your wheel to go to the left. If it's going right, when you move it right, reverse that.
Right, you're going to have to move the plane and make sure that it's reacting in the right direction to correct for that movement. So this is a little more of an advanced setup. There's more possibility for error, but you do have that option. The gain channel here is basically the same as a normal gain channel in the sense that it adjusts that gyro gain, so you can adjust it on the fly. You can either leave it off and just set the base gain, or you can assign it to a channel. So in this case, we don't have any other channels set up for gain, so we'll just set it to the same knob that we had the other ones on. And then after you find a gain for it that you like, you can disable that gain channel and set this value to what that channel output was. Then we have heading on or off. So this is the same as with the normal gyro setup, where a negative value is heading hold or a positive value is gyro. If you have the gain channel disabled and heading on, then that'll default be heading. And this is basically just heading for that nose wheel instead of just jerky movement reactions.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Heading window limits how much that heading can go. And it's a percentage of your overall travel for that channel. For the nose wheel channel. And then the last thing you need to do is learn the travel. And this is basically to teach it what that travel range actually is on the channel output itself. So you want to make sure you have the max rates for this channel, and then just move your nose wheel channel side to side, get that full range of movement, hit apply, and it'll learn that.
That's easy enough.
Yep. And then once you're done with all that, save settings and reboot. Because for these settings to kick in, it has to do another reboot.
Forward programming.
If you do the save and reboot, it'll save and restart on its own. If you're in forward programming and you change some settings, such as gyro gains and stuff like that, and it doesn't automatically do a reboot, then you'll have to back out of forward programming for it to save.
Okay.
You can't just turn off the receiver while you're in forward programming, because sometimes it won't save the settings. So always make sure to leave forward programming when you're done changing something.
Yep.
So I guess we can go over the troubleshooting stuff.
Okay.
So one thing that happens a lot with these new setups is, like as we mentioned earlier, there are certain checks for initialization before the gyros or before the servos are even turned on.
So the first check is orientation.
Right. So make sure after you set this up that your gyro is oriented properly. Right. If you have it upside down or something, or just kind of dangling off, you're just testing stuff.
And we'll show that again.
It's not going to initialize.
So we'll turn it off. We've got it upside down, which is the opposite of what we had it.
Right.
And we'll turn it on. And you'll see on the screen, if we go back to the...
Well, so actually, you don't even get telemetry until that gyro
so that's a good indicator, is if you don't have telemetry bar, the little telemetry bars on the top.
If your little remote receivers are on, but your main receiver orange light is not on, then that means your gyro is probably not oriented properly.
Right.
Based on the setup you did for it.
Right. Based on the setups, the orientation that you assigned, if it's not right during the orientation check, you won't get telemetry, and you won't get all the lights on here. So let's say we flip the plane back over, stick her down, she will initialize, and we're good.
Right.
All right, so that's number one.
That second check it did was for center sticks, where we can power cycle it again. And
so troubleshooting step number 2.
Yeah, make sure you haven't changed any model parameters like sub trims, servo reversing, or even wing type. If you did a wing type, then you probably need to do a factory reset and do everything as well, because make sure you have everything correct. But those are things that might make the receiver think your sticks aren't centered. Right. Because your channel settings have changed and stuff.
So troubleshooting step number 2, if you get the lights, but you're not getting stick movement.
Right, if the servos aren't turning on.
Right. Then make sure that your sticks are centered and that you don't have anything that's causing one of the control surfaces to be off-center, like flaps.
Yeah, flaps, if you have elevator compensation, that could be enough to throw it off-center. And if it is a little bit of compensation and still enough to be in that center window, that's still not a good thing, because now your center position is off. And when you're in an actual center position, your priority is going to kick in, and you're not going to have as much gyro gain as you thought you were supposed to have.
So maybe make that a pre-flight thing, is just to make sure your flaps are in the neutral position.
Make sure everything is in neutral position. No, nothing enabled that would give you channel compensation. If your servos aren't initializing at all, and you're not sure why, it says center position or center sticks, but you do servo relearn and stuff, and none of that fixes it. The last resort thing you can do is factory reset the receiver, and the way to do that with a bind plug, you put a bind plug in the bind plug port, power cycle it 5 times in a row, you'll see all, and we can actually show this
let's do that here real quick. So we're going to do a factory reset for the AS3000 and the Powersafe receiver without having to hit factory reset on the radio. So you put a bind plug into the bind port, and you power cycle 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we'll see the lights will be blinking just like that, if you guys can see that. All the lights, except for the blue one, which indicates power, will be blinking.
Right.
And then
you power cycle it one more time, should be reset.
And now it's reset. And we'll have to rebind it.
You can, no, actually, it does save your bind.
Oh, really?
Yep, it does save your bind. So you don't have to rebind it.
So if I
but you will probably want to rebind anyway, just to make sure your
fail-safes and stuff.
Your fail-safes and everything are correct.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, and one thing to note is this doesn't work with the bind button. It has to be a bind plug.
Has to be a bind plug.
Yeah. Okay. I think that pretty much covers it.
All right. Well, if we missed anything, or if you guys have any questions, comment below. And if you want to continue watching more of our videos and learn more about the AS3000 and everything Spektrum, like and subscribe.